We're joined now by Arise Exchange anchor Boason Omofaye, and of course, senior economist, SPM professional Paul Alaje, both join us now. Thank you so much. But let's start from Paul Alaje, who is over there. Let's start with you looking at the MTEV 2025 to 2027 and this proposed 47.9 trillion budget framework for 2025. What are the key economic indicators and projections that might shape the success of this budget?
Yeah, thank you so very much for having me with Mr. Boason. First, I must say that government is projecting exchange rate at 1,400, especially for the 2025 budget. The exchange rate closed today at over 1,650. That means we're estimating far below what is obtainable in the market. Secondly, we have also seen that government is projecting an oil benchmark that is far beyond 2 million barrels a day. Meanwhile, we have seen some exceptions or some, I don't want to call it outlier, in recent time when we've been able to do up to 1,800 million barrels a day. The Bureau of Statistics report earlier in the year left Nigeria average to about 1,410 as against 2 million or 1.8 billion barrel that is expected. So speaking of all of these, it may be clear that achieving some of the goals or expectation of government might not be as realistic as we thought, as we are thinking right now. And if you check, for most of the time, we have not really achieved some of the parameters in our budgets. So secondly, when you look at budget deficits that is also presented about 13 trillion, I think 13.8 trillion, it is clear that with all of these proposals, Nigeria may not work exactly the way it appears, because I've checked it over the years. In the last 10 years, we seems to be missing the target. I think I would like to anchor on the issue of growth. And it's important for us to be very careful when we look at the economy and we say the economy is growing. First, we said that Nigeria economy is growing currently at over 3% using Naira as an estimate. I can tell you that when you compare Nigeria, it will not be compared with Sokoto, nor will it be compared with Imo, or will it be compared with Oyo. Nigeria will be compared with the likes of Ghana, United Arab Emirates, and perhaps the United States. Now, when you look at the GDP of United Arab Emirates, it was over $400 billion. Nigeria at a time was above the GDP of United Arab Emirates. Today, Nigeria's GDP is struggling to be around $300 billion. The question is, can we say that an economy whose GDP in dollar terms significantly slump is growing at all? Well, I think this is where opinion may not really be unanimous as to whether the economy is growing or not. And this budget is giving us approximately 47 trillion naira. And you might look at it as this is huge. But when you look at this budget compared to 2021 budget, 2022 budget, those two budgets are in fact bigger than this budget, even though in naira terms, they may be smaller. 2023 budget, what was the exchange rate expectation of government? I believe it's far less than half of what is obtainable today. So when you talk about Nigerian budget or Nigeria MTEV, there are parameter expectation of what the exchange rate will be, because one of the key product government keep adding to the budget remain crude, and how much we export, how much it will be. We usually say not so much, even though we still say it, but not so much about what we are expecting in terms of revenue from other natural resources.
It's me to Boason here. Let me come back to the studio here, Boason here. If you look at the key parameters, of course, the benchmark for crude oil is pegged at 2.06 million per barrel per day. Yes. And of course, if you look at the benchmark in terms of the dollar, it's about $75 as well. And the exchange rate at 8,400 naira. These are key parameters. And of course, the GDP is also set at 4.6% in the 2025 fiscal year. Yes. So the question is, how is this parameter likely to shape revenue and make up for the deficit? That's one. And the second one is that if you look at this, I mean, perhaps this is the first time we're having, these big budget. Let me put it that way, in quote unquote. So what stand out for you particularly in all of these figures?
Well, thank you, Frank. I think Nigeria needs a very big budget. We're 200 million people. We need big budget, but we need a budget that's designed for the private sector to catalyze the economy rather than a budget that will continue for government spending. Now, we need to get that right. Our productivity level is very low. Right now, we're doing a GDP per capita, according to the latest IMF, about less than $1,000 per each of us. And that's no good news. And that's according to the IMF data for October. Now, when you look at the GDP, also a projection of 4.6%, for this year, what the IMF is projecting is a 3.2% for next year, as well as 3.7% between 2025 and 2027, according to the World Bank. So if you look at these numbers, they are way below what the government is putting together out of the 2025 budget, which we just have today. So it looks like some of the government numbers are much higher, far more optimistic than what the World Bank and the IMF has on paper. So now that gives us a little bit of a concern as to whether we'll be able to do that. So go back to what Paul Alaje was talking about, growth. We need to engineer growth. Will we be able to spend this roughly 40 billion or 48 billion, a trillion naira to engineer growth? And where would the money go? In accounting, you talk about source and application of funds in accounting practice. You find out that you need to source the fund, then you need to apply it. The problem with us hasn't been much of sourcing the fund, even though we've not been able to go back to the Eurobond market since the new administration came in. Right now, South Africa is doing 12-year, 30-year paper, less than between 7.5, 8.23%, I guess. Eurobond right now as we speak, because there's so much confidence in the South African government of national unity, which was a few months ago. So the government is looking at a very big budget, but let's hope that the investments will come in. It's very good news, for example, that the Prime Minister from India will come in this weekend. We'll be able to have some fruitful discussions. We've been to Saudi Arabia. Mr. President's been there. He's been to a number of countries around the world. We need to see this $30 billion, whatever, plus money coming, which is patient capital that we need from outside. But we also need to find a way to engineer domestic capital that will also be here. And that means we need to change a number of practices and behaviors and our attitudes to doing business.
I'm able to chip in. I mean, just wanted to know, how is the government planning to fund this? What are the sources like? I mean, of course, the government...
So the Eurobond,
yes,
the Sukuk,
yes,
for road infrastructure and what have you.
Well, that's a new borrowing plan that the government is planning.
Yes.
So are we saying that these new borrowing plans are also going to serve as a buffer, or will I say foundation, for the 2025 budget?
If you look at the tax reform by Taiwo Udile and co, is expected to also stimulate government revenue. But again, the government at the same time is also trying to help small and medium enterprises, individuals, to get a bit of a cushioning from the impact of the fuel subsidy removal, as well as the exchange rate realignment, which was done both last year, nearly simultaneously. So it's a very tough rope for the government. Try on one hand to be very nice and gentle, taking into account that things are tough for Nigerians, but at the same time trying to rein in revenue on this side of taxes. Good news yesterday, the customs says they've done 5 trillion, 5.079 or 4.9 trillion naira for this year. That's some money on the table. That's some good news, but we need to do a whole lot more. The numbers, the key macroeconomic numbers, are not looking too good. And to be honest with ourselves, they're not looking too pretty.
And so the government needs to put their feet on
So we need to engineer both local and foreign patient capital into the economy. We need to find a way to do it. The $500 million diaspora fund that the government did recently, we need to have more details as to what projects will this money go into. We don't have that information publicly yet. What we had at the time when it was done a few months ago was that the government will, the presidency or the president will have to decide what projects that $500 million will do. The government went to the market with 500 million. They got an excess of additional 200 or 300 million dollars, which was a sign, a testament of a good faith that Nigerians who have this money under their pillows in whatever will bring them out and support the economy. And I want to put this out that we need to support this economy to grow. Whoever has it in both naira and dollars should bring them into the economy.
All right.
And we can see what such investments can do for every one of us.
Let's bring in Paul now. But with the, Paul, let me get your opinion. I mean, the government is borrowing 2.2 billion in terms of external borrowing plan, and that's a new plan that the Minister of Finance, spoke about. I would like to ask you, in terms of sustainability, how sustainable is this trajectory in the long term? Let me get your opinion from that.
Well, economics has three positions when it comes to sustainability of loans. One is to watch for the country's debt to GDP. This is a condition we call necessary condition, but not sufficient. Now, when you check all of those, there are countries that are doing 100% of their GDP. Some are doing 50%. That is when you compare debt to GDP. Nigeria is doing, I think, around over 30, over 40% debt to GDP. But remember, this is only necessary, but not sufficient. When you get to sufficient condition, is that you must not go beyond 33% of your debt service to revenue. According to Mr. President, during the time he had a broadcast for the last major protest, he mentioned that debt service to revenue has reduced from 98% to 67 or 68%. Of course, that's an improvement, but it's still a far cry from what is recommended by economics, which is 33.3%. 1/3 of all our revenue is what we should have as maximum cap for debt service. So if you are borrowing more money, and we have not satisfied the sufficient condition, then one can only be worried. Now, it is not that the monies we are borrowing is even domestic, but it's a foreign loan. Yes, I understand we may need it for our reserve, but how much of help will they do in our reserve with the reality of what our economics is today? The third condition, which perhaps is the most important condition, which I've, of course, been mentioning in the last 10 years, is when you compare the rate of borrowing and the rate of economic growth, I can tell you that in the last 5 to 10 years, borrowing has grown between 7 to 20%. That is the average rate of borrowing. But the economy has been within 1 to 3%. So are we saying we are actually borrowing, and especially foreign borrowing, are they really impacting the economy? Well, the answer is, of course, easy to know, because you should not be having that kind of gap between the impact on the economy in terms of economic growth and the impact of borrowing. The borrowing, if it is impacting the economy, we would have seen Nigeria economy grow between 6 to 7 or in fact 10%. But that is not what we are seeing this moment today. So if you are borrowing more money, well, I am worried. I'm worried because of exchange rate risk. We have seen what Naira was 4 years ago, and we knew what it was 8 years ago. We knew what it was 12 years ago. Better off 12 years ago. Game partly was up 4 years ago, and it's even worse than what it was 4 years now. So you can use this to project, because as economists, we don't do voodoo. What we do is we use the knowledge of what has happened in the past, and we use economic model to project into the future. So if you have seen the last 12, last 15, last 20 years of Naira, how do we now predict the future of Naira, knowing fully well that the policy environment is not exactly different from what we have known before?
Okay, let me wrap up with you, Boason, and talk to us about what should Nigerians, be most hopeful about, and when you look at the budget, ahead, and of course, amidst the borrowing that is ongoing and what the government is planning to do.
Right now,
as a wrap up quickly,
things are not looking really pretty for ordinary Nigerians. I'm not too sure it's looking really pretty also for Mr. President and his team. And I think that's one of the reasons why recently the cabinet was rejigged to bring a few more hands that are more of a round peg in a round hole. For example, the Minister of Industry, Trade and Investment, and a few others to come in. The president needs all the good men and women that can work very hard. He has put himself up for the job, and he says he's not shy about it, and I love that. So he has to face it very squarely. This is going to be his major budget moving forward within the MTEF of 2025 to 2027. So it's got 2-3 years, technically speaking, for a transition for another general election. So the window will start closing very quickly. The 2025 budget will be a major determinant for this administration to show that whether they know what they're doing or they don't know what they're doing, or they need more help to know what to get things right. Because now you've spent about a year and a few months taking over from a previous administration, and you're now having a budget that takes you to the midterm of your 4 years, technically speaking. That's what this new budget for next year is all about. So it's a make or mark budget for the government, and Nigerians will be watching that very closely and see how much patience they've been able to deliver and give to the government, and hope that they've given so far. If that hope will be rewarded, to see how this budget will deliver some goods on the table for average Nigerian.
All right.
That
Hopefully the hope of Nigerian or the trust of Nigerian, this government will be rewarded. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Anchor Rise Exchange. Thank you for your time. And of course, Paul Alaje joining us virtually, senior economist at SPM Professional. Thank you for coming on the News Night.